what a weekend in combat sports. It's not often that we not only have the UFC to talk about, but we also have multiple boxing stories, more MMA stories. This is going to be a crazy episode to really dive into all these topics. So we hope you all buckle in and enjoy the show with us. But, we got to start off UFC 299. I'm wearing my Sugar Sean hat. I have my Miami Heat jersey from high school on, and it does not fit very well. I was telling you before we started that this is probably 2 or 3 sizes below what I'm wearing, so it's not quite squeezing me, but I'm also wearing 2 layers under this. And even though outside right now there's 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts, I'm still feeling pretty hot right now, and because of that, it's going to be an interesting long episode of the Hurt Handbook.
Hot like Miami, it makes sense.
Exactly, and honestly, hot like this fight card, because UFC 299, man, was just insane. It was such a fun event. We had some changing of the guards in some circumstances, but there were also some fighters who we obviously know very well who got wins, and some of them maybe unexpected, some of them kind of expected, but there's a lot to dive into. I say we start with UFC 299. We also got Joshua versus Ngannou to talk about, and then also Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. So much news. But let's start with UFC 299. Let's start with the main event, which is Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Chito Vera 2. And for those who didn't see it, a dominant win for the champion, Sean O'Malley, by unanimous decision, 2 50-45s and a 50-44. In one of the more dominant displays of striking that I think we've ever seen across 5 rounds. I mean, just stat-wise, O'Malley was 230 for 356, landing at a 64% clip, which is, people don't realize just how insane that is over 25 minutes. But the volume just clearly overwhelmed Chito a little bit. He couldn't really pressure Sean as much as I think he wanted to, because he was just getting hit 2-3 times before he could even really counter. But I just think the feints, Sean O'Malley's just supremely awesome speed for 135. I mean, for a guy who's 5'11", his speed is just unreal. And it just seemed to give Chito fits on the feet. Chito did kind of do well in some of the later rounds. Not well enough to win them, but a little better than he did in the early rounds, just because it seemed like the desperation, I think, was starting to kick in, and he realized he had to come forward and just kind of throw caution into the wind at times. But overall, Sean O'Malley, as usual, a sniper on the feet, just an exceptional performance. What did you think of it, man?
So not only was, this an absolute masterclass from an offensive striking standpoint for Sean O'Malley, but in terms of just stifling Chito too and not letting Chito get any serious damage in on him, I think that goes to show you what a UFC champion is made of. And this being his first title defense and going all 5 rounds and putting on the kind of damage he was able to put on, to go to that point. I mean, just for Chito to even be able to make it through the entire 5 rounds, it goes to show how much that guy, I think how much that guy wanted it, and it's just, I think that it lived up. I think obviously you want to see maybe a closer. I think obviously it was clear cut that Sean O'Malley, at least after those first 3 rounds, so I think to Chito's credit, for him to get into the championship rounds, and then obviously with his back against the wall, he's got to turn things up, but he was able to, and there's only so much you can really do at the end of the day. So I mean, you gotta give the that's a testament to that guy's heart and how much of a brawler he really is. But Sean O'Malley is just, like you said, he's a sniper, he's an absolute technician, and he was just able to piece Chito up in just really every facet you can ask for on the feet. So
I mean, that knee that he hit him with in round 2. Knee. Oh my God.
So to me, how Chito was able to wear that, I think at first in real time when you see Chito's head snap back like that, we all just naturally think oh my God, he just took an absolute knee to the, just a knee to the face, period. But I think we all think it's to the jaw. And it's how does he not even get knocked down let alone knocked out completely. Where that would have finished like almost everybody else in in the bantamweight division. So
Maybe even
I
some
think,
featherweights.
yeah, I know, right? That's how much force was behind that. I think what it comes down to is to me the knee land. It was more of a like an orbital thing on Cheeto's face where Sean got more of the eye of Cheeto rather than the jaw, which obviously he wanted, was looking to finish him because right after he hit that knee, he went for another knee and hit that one, and then towards the end of the round he went for another knee. But Cheeto, just the fact that he's even, because I think you saw later in the fight, you saw that cut that Cheeto was wearing on his eye. He just had to, for him to eat that anyways and stay on his feet. And then obviously he's got to take, the shots up against the cage as well. Like, I don't know, like
Didn't
I
even
don't,
fall. Like,
I
we're giving him credit for not getting knocked out. He didn't even get knocked down, and like that's just crazy to me. I mean, you mentioned the shot hit him in the orbital, which is, I think, probably why maybe he didn't finish
Yeah.
the fight with that, because I think it hurts, but it's not like a brain ringer. Although that shot was so powerful, it probably was, just not maybe to Cheeto, because his chin is just different. I think that's fair to say. He's in that like Max Holloway class
And
of just people.
you saw him trying to cover up too, but like literally it's just once again like how much Sean O'Malley is able to time these shots and set them up perfectly. Like obviously that's a credit to Tim Welch, his coach, and just how the pairing that those two are able to make from fight to fight. Like, and now obviously get to where they are now as world champions. Like, I mean, just there's like you really like gotta like just let it wash over you and just take it in because he was able to put it on for all 5 rounds. I think just as the fight went, after I think it was clear that Sean O'Malley had those first 3 rounds, and I think the second round even being like a 10-8. I think that was there where he was gonna let Cheeto start coming forward and start like not get desperate obviously, but like obviously Cheeto at that point has to go for broke and really like put a finish to the fight. And so for Sean O'Malley to let him do that and then just like pick his shots that way, like yeah man, it's championship type material. And
I think people tend to overlook how good Sean O'Malley is because of the outside the cage persona, but when you look at this fight and just even look at the stats and how accurate he was, how quick he is when you're just watching him, how technical he is, we're watching a true champion. This dude isn't some fluky type of guy who's up here at the top. Like, yeah, you could argue he was fast-tracked in a certain way, but he's beaten some legit killers in the bantamweight division, and I don't think we're going to be seeing any, I guess, what's the word, dip in that competition as long as he's champion here.
And we've expressed our opinion on when it comes to lining up the Ultimate Fighter people that have had to come up and get their contract that way, and then Dana White Contender Series guys like Sean O'Malley. Like obviously the difference between the Ultimate Fighters guys that have seen success after that, and then between Dana White Contender Series guys that have come up, like for Sean O'Malley to now get to this point where obviously he's already coming in with all this hype, and just to deliver, to even to right now to avenge that one fluke loss, you can say now, like, and really like let people know that because he's clearly still feels that he's completely undefeated. I mean, how can you argue with the guy now after what he just did?
Yeah, I mean, he avenged his only loss, and obviously that one will be on the record. The Sugar State Athletic Commission doesn't really have jurisdiction over the rest of them. But in general, it's just crazy because, like I said, people kind of don't give him the credit that he deserves because of how flamboyant he is outside of the cage, and he talks a lot of crap. But in the cage, this dude performs, and that's the reason why he's getting these opportunities. He shows up when he needs to, and this fight was really the perfect example of that. A fight against a guy who beat him, fluke or not, that's still what happened. That has to be in his mind no matter what he says. But he came into this fight and he honestly made it look really easy. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And I think he deserves the credit of being a true champion, not just a star that like Gen Z kids like, because this dude is the real deal in mixed martial arts, and he just keeps proving it fight after fight. But when you think about the future for Sean O'Malley, there's a lot of different options for him because, he called out Ilia Topuria. I don't think that'll be next. There's two other contenders that pop into my mind at 135, and that's Merab and Corey Sandhagen. Who do you think will be next for Sean O'Malley, I guess, out of those three people?
Like it should be I feel like it should be Merab, right? But I mean, I understand guys come in with a plan, they're gonna get this belt and then they're gonna win a certain amount of fights and then they're gonna take another belt. But I mean, shouldn't Ilia Topuria have to defend this title at least once before that fight happens? So as much as that would be cool to see and all, it just doesn't make the most sense. I think you should just do what makes the most sense in this case, considering one guy hasn't defended the title and one guy just did defend the title, but that came in a rematch of a guy he's already faced, and a guy that in terms of the top contenders,
lost to Corey Sandhagen,
yeah,
who technically he just jumped two of the top contenders because the champion wanted this fight. And I'm not gonna argue if that's warranted or not. I think when you're the champion, you have a certain right to call the shots. I think you've earned it. But at the end of the day, like you're saying, Topuria needs to defend the title, and O'Malley still has contenders to beat. And I honestly, we've said this many times, but the champ versus champ talk, wouldn't you want to see that fight after they get a few title defenses? Because that kind of hypes it up a bit more when these dudes are looking like unbeatable champions in their division. That's why it was so fun when Volk went up to 155, because you already cleared out 145. You're like, well, let's just see what he can do a weight class up. How cool would it be if O'Malley could beat Merab and beat Sandhagen, and Topuria could beat, maybe Volk again or Brian Ortega, and then each of them have a few title defenses, and then that fight happens when they're both even bigger stars than they are now? I mean, come on. That's why I just don't like the rush to do these champ versus champ fights. And it's not really the UFC. It's more the fighters that are really pushing it because they see the payday. And I kind of get it.
Can I lay out for you real quick how crazy all this division, I would say, crossover for all these fighters is starting to get? Because we're at a point now where Sean O'Malley wants Ilia Topuria, and Ilia Topuria wants Islam Makhachev. Islam Makhachev wants Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards wants DDP. DDP wants Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira wants Tom Aspinall, and Tom Aspinall wants John Jones. Yeah. And if you're the guy, if you are the higher ups at, if you're the higher ups at UFC, the matchmakers and stuff, it cuts. I feel like it gets. I hope it might be getting to a point where it's you kind of just have to please these guys, considering they are your top names, and all of them want this, like you just said, that payday. And no variety. But
I just think that the UFC, at the end of the day, they have the ultimate bargaining power as the biggest company in mixed martial arts. There's still a lot of people to this day who see the sport as UFC and not MMA, which is crazy to think about, even with all the other promotions that we have. But I don't know. Sean O'Malley's a bit different because he's a big star, especially with the younger generation, and it makes a lot of sense. He's put himself in that right crowd for those people. And I think he has a bit more leverage than certain other champions do. But at the end of the day, I'd rather see him fight Merab. I'd even rather see him fight Sandhagen right now than fight Topuria. For me, maybe I'm old school, but I just want to see the best fight the best contenders. And then when there are no contenders left to fight, that's when those champ versus champ fights feel the most special, because you know that that person is the best in their division and no one can touch them, and that's why they're going up. I don't like someone going up before we know how good they even are in their own division. Yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I might be a bit old school in that, but judging by what I see most MMA fans say, I think that a majority of people probably agree with us. And Dana White kind of agrees too. He said that that fight probably shouldn't be next. But
yeah,
let's talk about the co-main event, because that was a crazy fight in itself too. We had Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint-Denis, and this was a fight that was so interesting because Saint Denis was ranked number 12, Poirier ranked number 3. Just in a way, it almost seemed like it made no sense for Dustin Poirier to even take this fight. He's gotten the McGregor paydays too, but he even talked about it during the weigh-in show before and after the fight, honestly. He was saying how he just has a different type of respect for the sport, and someone gave him a shot at the top, so why shouldn't he give the rising stars of the next generation a shot at the top of the food chain at 155? And Benoit Saint Denis, he came to fight, this wasn't like a very big skill difference. Saint Denis was doing really well in this fight early, especially with like some of the grappling. Besides when Dustin Poirier wanted to jump guillotine, that was pretty fun. We'll get to that. But this fight was just a dogfight, really, because Poirier would not let himself truly just get out grappled. He was always scrambling, and he made this fight ugly, which in the preview before this we said that he had to do, and he excels in those dog fights. And he's against a dude who obviously French special forces. He has a different type of mentality, and Dustin Poirier was still able to drag him into deep water, and in round 2 just hit him with that perfect right hook and knocked him out cold. Just an insane performance. Like Dana White said, these are the types of fights that make you into a legend. And this was so fun. The new generation gets to see a guy like Dustin Poirier, who's been around for so long, get a win like this, and it was exciting. And it's crazy to think that I think it's 38 or 39 fights now. He still has not lost 2 fights in a row, which is so impressive. Like, there's one thing about being undefeated, but it's another thing to take losses the way Dustin Poirier will take them and then come back and just be this impressive, honestly, in the cage. And
still making a push for the title, like number 3 fighting number 12. I mean, that just goes to show you how much like the guy's willing to do whatever it takes to get to the top.
But can I say this too? Like, we're saying number 12, and like that's kind of the reason why it almost didn't make sense for Poirier to take it. But I do think Saint Denis proved in this fight that he is one of the best lightweights in the world, which is why this win was so impressive, because Dustin was able to overcome that adversity and then finish him the way he finished him, which was incredible.
Yeah, here's what I think is in that first round, maybe just coming to the fight period. But to talk about, I guess, before the fight, maybe I don't think Saint Denis was as prepared for the counters of Dustin Poirier as he obviously should have been, because in that first round, I think Saint Denis obviously had his way with Dustin in terms of grappling and whatnot, and obviously not getting hit the way he did in the next round. But like in that round, it seemed like, hey, like clear round win for Saint Denis, maybe even a 10-8. Like, Dustin might be in some trouble here. And then right off the bat, I think Saint Denis, he won in that second round. Saint Denis wanted to go right back to heavy pressuring Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier hit him with another counter right, and from there it just seemed like things just switched. Like, things just a switch just flipped for Dustin Poirier, where he was able to legit just put it all together. Maybe not totally in the way that he would have liked, obviously, with the guillotine attempts. And
I love in the interview he just goes, "I ain't stopping, I ain't stopping," which is so funny.
It's awesome, bro. Like, he's an absolute. He knew he had to, like we're saying about just being a dog in there. Like, he knew he had to take it to this guy just as much as Saint Denis would have to take it to him. And then obviously one guy was gonna get their hand raised in the end, and Dustin Poirier wasn't gonna let just more comfortability, I guess, for Saint Denis like he had in that first round carry over for the rest of the fight. So Dustin lined up the hook just absolutely perfectly, and that's just how that goes.
Yeah. I mean, I loved everything about this fight. When we saw a guy in Dustin Poirier, who's a legit UFC legend, re-cemented his place at the top of 155. He's still in the top 3. People, I mean, Ali Abdelaziz, Islam, and Poirier, they're talking about June possibly for a Makhachev-Poirier fight, which would be crazy if he was able to jump over Justin Gaethje. But that's just how impressive this win was. And honestly, like, everything about this fight, even I was telling you I loved the post-fight interview, besides the "I ain't stopping" when he's talking about jumping guillotine, but even when at the end Joe Rogan's like, "You're the man, Dustin," and Dustin just goes, "I'm just a man, Joe." Like, the fact that this dude has fought who he's fought, beaten some of the killers that he's beaten, and he's still that humble of a guy, just says a lot about his character. He's always class in victory and defeat, and that's one of the reasons why I like Dustin Poirier so much. I feel like in this generation with, more crazy trash talk, it just seems like he's the last of like a dying breed in a way. But it seems like he might be around for a little while longer after a win like that over such a crazy rising star. But what do we think is next for Dustin Poirier? Do you think he gets a title shot? I'm honestly not sure what's next, because a lot of the fights at lightweight, or the top fighters at lightweight, they're booked against people. I was talking about Gaethje, but he's booked against Max Holloway, Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. It just seemed, and like Michael Chandler, who's already fought, is kind of he's waiting for Conor McGregor. God knows how long he's going to be waiting. But what do you think is next for the Diamond?
I want to say the title fight too. Honestly, I don't know if it'll take maybe one more fight or something like that, but I mean, the guy clearly is he's still as good as we've seen him. And I mean, just you're not good. You don't have that many fights left from Dustin Poirier, anyways. So yeah, that becomes pretty interesting, I guess. If he were to fight for the title and win the title, then
imagine if he wins it via guillotine.
Yeah, I know, right?
He finally gets that guillotine, and then he's like, "I'm done."
Exactly. Yeah, man, going out on top like that could be something. But I mean, yeah, that's the thing too, Yeah, the UFC never wants a champion that is obviously on their way out soon. So, yeah,
we'll see. I mean, the UFC though, they definitely like Poirier, because it's a guy, even if he has a limited amount of fights left, he's always going to put on an exciting fight, win or lose, and the fans love Dustin Poirier. So I think it's always a good idea to try and get someone like that into a title shot, because I think he's generally beloved. But one of the other things I was thinking about when I watched this fight, because again, this was Poirier's, one of his most impressive wins in a while, I think, that we've seen, just by the context of it. But Benoit Saint-Denis, he really proved himself in this fight, even in a knockout loss. It's just crazy.
Because you would think that, obviously every fight starts on the feet, so you would think that a guy like Poirier is going to be the one more on the offensive front and controlling the fight that way. But Saint-Denis, kind of goes to our preview of this fight. I wanted to mention how Saint-Denis is a guy that's just, he's able to he's able to neutralize guys and take away things and what they're comfortable in, and pretty much just cut the cage off and just make it the whole fight just a living hell for the other guy in there. So it seemed like in that first round, once again, I think Dustin really was relying on those counters, and Saint-Denis, he was just able to just keep that real offensive firepower from Dustin Poirier, keep that away from what he was comfortable in doing. And then once the second round came around,
even Dustin said that his strength, Benoit Saint-Denis' strength, was just kind of unparalleled. He really was a strong guy, and he looks like a strong dude. He's very athletic, and I think that plays a lot into his style, which is, I think, a pure all-around mixed martial arts style. And I just love watching this guy fight. And because of this, I actually was doing a little matchmaking, and I think he should get a guy who's coming off a win on this card. And I was thinking Munhoz Gamrot versus Benoit Saint-Denis in a 5-round fight. That might be really fun. And I know the UFC usually doesn't like kind of doing that, booking a guy off a win versus a guy off a loss. But Saint-Denis, I don't think his stock really went down with this fight. I think people are just, I think people are just more impressed by how well Poirier was able to overcome that adversity and come back. I don't think anybody's really shitting on Saint-Denis. I think it's actually the exact opposite. I think that's why people are so impressed by what Dustin Poirier did, because he was against a guy who was so much further below him in the rankings, and clearly this dude deserves to be in the upper echelon, but Dustin still beat him because Dustin is just that man. But this card, it was really the gift that keeps on giving. We have so many more fights to talk about. So let's move on to the next one, which is Michael Venom Page versus Kevin Holland. Obviously, Michael Venom Page Bellator star making his UFC debut, and he won this fight via unanimous decision. All three judges scored at 29-28, and I honestly, I this fight was impressive to me, and it wasn't the most exciting, but I think Kevin Holland's frustration was because of how MVP is so elusive, and he's just able to hit you a few times and get out of range, almost even in a more unorthodox way than Wonderboy is, because MVP, like, when you watch him, he takes up so much room in the cage when he's circling because he's bouncing back and forth, switching stances, moving forward when he's landing the jabs, and like he's taking up like half the cage pretty much. So like, yeah, Kevin Holland was able to pressure him, but MVP is so elusive and he uses that room so well that it just seemed to really frustrate Kevin. But MVP, man, I was thoroughly impressed. One of the best counter strikers. I think we already knew that in the sport, and now he proves it against a guy like Kevin Holland, who we know is a really good striker. He's faced high-level competition, and now MVP should probably be in the top 15 at 170 in the UFC. So what did you think of MVP's debut?
Yeah, the Michael Venom Page is a real showman. I think that all us fans definitely got that a clear look of that. I think coming in, obviously we had an idea, but now that he actually has a UFC fight under his belt now, and a fight that he won as well. Like, I think we all say, I think most fans would agree with you in the sense that he should be fighting one of these top guys now, considering coming into the fight we were debating whether or not he could already be fighting one of these top guys, and I think Kevin Holland was a great entry point for sure, and even for Kevin Holland, and from his perspective, like to see a guy like Michael Venom Page and to be his first opponent in UFC, like going forward, for Kevin Holland, like that might that could open up some like even more fights that we thought we wouldn't see for Kevin Holland at some point, and for Michael Venom Page now, like all there's really left to do is I guess just see what number he's gonna have next to his name.
Yeah.
And
I think it's safe to assume that he'll be moving up. That's for sure. And
yeah.
I think he could really call a lot of people out. He didn't want to do it in the cage, but I was looking at the rankings. I was saying maybe him versus Ian Gary, get two popular people over in the UK, fight them up against each other, make it for one of the top spots at the welterweight division. My other one, this one's a bit more of a dark horse pick. And I'm almost like sad to be saying this, but I'm only saying it because I genuinely don't know what's going to happen here. If Belal Muhammad can't get a title shot, which honestly it's crazy, but it's seeming more and more likely that actually might not happen, I could see MVP versus Belal Muhammad in a title eliminator fight. I wouldn't hate that. I mean, I'd hate it because Belal should just get a title fight, but in terms of the matchup, if you really want to propel MVP to the top, I think about like Ben Askren, for example, when he got into the UFC. They put him up against Robbie Lawler, who was a bit higher ranked than Kevin Holland was, but he was, I would say, still at like a similar level. And then immediately they were putting him up against top 3, top 4 in those title eliminator situations. So I feel like MVP, it wouldn't be crazy to put him in one of those fights. I don't think that you'd get a lot of backlash. I know there's some people who don't like that point fighting style, but I was super impressed.
Yeah.
I mean, crazy punches, no-look elbows, awesome.
That's what I'm saying, though, and I wanted to like mention how much of a showman this guy can actually be, because there's fans claiming, like, I guess this fight seemed a lot more decisive for MVP than like it actually was, because it was a closer fight than people are giving credit for, to be honest. So I guess like in terms
I don't know though, like round 1, yeah, because Kevin Holland was able to get him down, but this fight was pretty one-sided on the feet.
That is true. That is true as well. Like you could clearly see that Kevin Holland. I think Kevin Holland definitely like wanted to engage more, but for better or for worse. But I think Michael Venom Page, like from the get-go, like knew how he was gonna win the fight, to be honest, and all he had to do was just not get finished and not get taken down to the ground as much, and that's what happens.
I mean,
so.
it's just how he fights. And Kevin Holland, people don't really give him credit for this, but it's worth noting. Like, he has a really good chin, too. And he was dropped a few times, but he's just such a tough dude that he keeps going. Because we've seen MVP truly hurt some dudes. I remember in Bellator, I forget who his opponent was.
He's got, like, a freaking, like, titanium knee.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when he kicked, I wish I could remember this guy's name, but he had kicked somebody in Bellator and literally smashed the dude's nose in on the finish. Like, this is a dude, like, he does have power. He's not just, like, touching guys, he puts dudes down. But Kevin Holland is a tough guy, and I don't think people give him enough credit for that trait. And maybe that's why maybe some people aren't giving MVP some credit for this win as much, but I don't know. I was thoroughly impressed.
Yeah,
I didn't know what to really think coming in because I did think MVP was a little unproven. But after this fight, I'm ready to see him against some top guys. And I want to see what someone as cool as he is could do at the top of the division. Because like you were saying, I think there's a promotional aspect to it that the UFC is definitely going to consider. This dude has like a certain gravitas to him. People like him. He's good on the mic, and I do think that as he gets closer to the top of the division, we'll get to see that more and more. But another welterweight fight, kind of a very similar situation, honestly. But obviously JDM was in the UFC already, but another top contender versus an up-and-comer. Gilbert Burns versus Jack Della Maddelena. And this was an interesting fight to me because Gilbert Burns was winning the fight up until he wasn't.
Yeah, he was.
And, people can say that, oh, well, that means JDM's win wasn't that impressive. But you could also look at it in the sense that it was even more impressive because of that, because he was getting, maybe not dominated, but he was, I would say Gilbert was on his way to a handy win. And JDM was able to scramble out of Gilbert's just amazing jiu-jitsu and submission attempts. And he was able to obviously land that knee on the break, and the ground and pound was some of the most brutal ground and pound I've seen in a long time. So that was just a great finish. But yeah, overall, maybe wasn't the best performance. I did think his boxing was all right. I think the stance switches were throwing Gilbert off a little bit, but Gilbert, we were kind of saying this in the preview, he's such a savage in there. He's such a brawler that it didn't really matter that much, and he was able to throw crazy big shots back. But JDM's got a chin, man, and he's tough on the ground. I mean, there's not many people who Gilbert Burns can take their back and then they're able to scramble out of it multiple times, because that's just impressive to me that JDM was able to do that. But what did you think of the win here from Jack Della Maddelena?
I think me and you were pretty much in agreement in the sense that the longer the fight goes, the more in favor it'll be for Gilbert Burns. And when it comes to the clinch, that if Gilbert's able to get him in a short striking range like that, then his strength is just going to be able to overpower Jack Della Maddelena in that sense.
And it did at times. That's the thing. Like,
because Gilbert comes to brawl like he does, and yeah, like you just said, it did. And then so when it got to that third round, and we see that that Gilbert's like he's in control. Like, sure, he's gotten hit quite a bit, but that's just what happens with a guy like JDM. Like, he's gonna get his offense in one way or the other. But I don't think anybody saw it coming in the way that it did in that third round, for him to get to his feet with Gilbert on his back and then spin out of that, and then able to put together that crazy knee like he was able to, and then finish the fight that way. I think that in that way, just if you just look at the finish, and I get like it, obviously you got to take the fight as a whole and comment about it how it is, but if we just take that moment there and just really like look at how JDM was able to put that together and then win the fight that way, like I think that like just that is like impressive enough to keep pushing this guy. Keep putting this guy in the spotlight.
I think that the finish, and I'm glad you brought this up, because the finish was so brutal. And you mentioned JDM was able to scramble out of just a tough situation with Gilbert controlling him late in the round. And I think it says a lot about his fight IQ with the way he was able to time that, because he knew Gilbert was going to try and take him down again and keep the advantage. So he threw that knee in response, and it just landed perfectly. And then to get on top and land the ground and pound the way he did, and just to end the fight that close to the final bell. I mean, I think it was 3 minutes 43 seconds into the final round. So it was incredible timing, great fight IQ, and just brutal. I loved it.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at in terms of the fight IQ. Obviously, the higher up Jack Della Maddelena gets into this division, and he fights these guys like Gilbert Burns, who have already fought for the title at a point like that. That's gonna just prove to be more and more pivotal as his career goes on. So for him to put it together like that, this early into his career it says a lot, I think.
I mean, can we talk about too? In this post-fight interview, calls out Shavkat Rakhmonov.
That's what
who calls out Shavkat Rakhmonov? This dude is a badass, and that's a badass move, and I guarantee that fight will get made, because I'm sure there's not many people calling the matchmakers asking for that fight. So I'm sure the UFC loves that. It truly just shows that he's got balls. I think that's the best way to describe it.
That's a guy that definitely knows that the road to that 170-pound title is not easy at all, because obviously you ask Leon Edwards too on how tough it was for him to get to the title. Like, Bilal Muhammad, for instance, still waiting on his shot. Like, it is an absolute just gauntlet to get to that belt. So yeah, I think he understands that fight like this is he wins a fight like that, no one's gonna be questioning him afterwards. And if people wanted to call this fight a fraud check for him coming in, and now he's past this, well, now he's really gonna be going into the deep waters. So
yeah, did you see what Shavkat said too in response? He was like, I should honestly find it, because I couldn't do it justice just by trying to quote it. I think I have to say exactly what he said. He said, "I respect your courage and confidence, Jack, but you will face the same fate as my previous opponents." And for those who don't know or don't remember, Shavkat has 100% finish rate. So he's finished every single opponent.
These are two guys that absolutely know how to finish a fight. So
it's a fun one. I think they'll make it. But I was also thinking about Gilbert Burns and what could be next for him. And I think there's one fight that's on my mind that I've been thinking that really should have been made for such a long time. Gilbert Burns versus Colby Covington would be such a fun matchup, I think. Two guys, living in Florida. I think it'd be a fun one maybe to do a main event, 5-round main event in Florida on a fight night. Could be fun. Two guys who've been around for a while. I think you could argue this fight should have maybe even been made before they even got title shots, like when they were just both top contenders. But they're both coming off losses. I think this would be the best time to do it, unless they do want to give Colby Wonder Boy like he was asking for. But I think Burns versus Covington is more interesting stylistically, personally. But
yeah, bro, that'll really unleash. I think that kind of fight is really gonna have to unleash that vintage prime wrestling Colby Covington. Because
or would it though? He might have to keep this fight on the feet. But then again, he could, if JDM can scramble out of it.
Yeah.
Colby might be able to as well. That's why I want to see it. I do want to see these guys grapple. It was kind of like when Ben Askren fought Damian Maia. That was what the intrigue was for me there. And this would be, I think, a little bit of a lesser extent, because obviously Colby didn't do what Ben Askren did in college wrestling. But Burns and Maia, they're pretty comparable on the ground. So I think it'd be a fun wrestler versus jiu-jitsu guy
So
matchup.
In that sense, would it have to be, would you think it would be Colby Covington pretty much the one in control, and if he makes a mistake, then Gilbert's going to be able to capitalize and take the fight that way?
I think that's fair. But that's the thing. I don't know if Colby would really try and take him down as much.
Yeah.
It's just, do you even want to go into that lion's den? Because Ben Askren, part of the thing why he was doing that against Damian Maia is he wanted to prove a point that his version of grappling was better than Damian's. Obviously, that proved not to be the case in that fight. But who knows? Maybe Colby will want to take Gilbert down. And I would understand that, just out of a pride type of thing. But it's just such a fun fight stylistically, and I think that this would be the time to make it, if any. So with that, let's move on to the first fight on the main card. Petr Yan versus Song Yadong. And this was a fight that was really similar to a lot of other Petr Yan wins. Maybe not as impressive, but we were talking about this before the fight, whether it's like more of... Let me put it like this. Petr Yan is a slow starter. We were debating whether or not that was because he was in so many 5-round fights leading into the O'Malley one. But I think now that we've seen him in another 3-round fight and another round 1 where he clearly lost, I think that it's just fair to say that he's a slow starter. But I think it's on purpose. I think that his round 1 strategy is always to build like a profile on his opponent while being in the cage. And I think he did that successfully against Song. You know, Song's boxing in the first round was just incredible. The speed, the timing, and even his wrestling looked really good against Petr. But as the fight went on, Petr was able to duck out of the way, use his head movement, land body shots, land some good counters, and he was defending the takedowns pretty well. So it seemed like he gathered that intel that he needed and used it to win this fight via unanimous decision, which he did. All 3 judges scored at 29-28, which I think is very fair. So what did you think of the win from Petr?
Yeah, that's fair for sure to say that. He's just a slow starter, and then that was the same case for this fight. And then obviously you saw the rest of the fight playing in Petr Yan's favor, which is also like just these previous fights since he lost the belt. Like and when we were previewing this fight, talking about the skid that he's been on and how it's not like, you know, for one, he's fighting the top guys, and two, he's not getting dominant. Like, these are fights that are going the distance and that he's not getting his hand raised for. Like, you know, just like really you could chalk it up to just being unlucky at the end of the day if you want. But for this fight, you know, it seemed like okay, maybe it would be more the case. I think in that first round, because to bring up Song Yadong's wrestling, which, you know, I think we were all definitely seated and, you know, excited to see more of that super accurate and just powerful punching from Song Yadong, you know. And I mean, we did see it with the jab and whatnot. He kept flaking it, and you know, there was some success to it. But the further the fight went, obviously Petr Yan was able to pick up on that. But the wrestling was the one thing that I don't think, like, you know, either way that, you know, Petr Yan obviously had to adjust to. But that right there was what was gonna, if Song Yadong was gonna win that fight, then that right there was why he would. There was you know, in that first round there was a backlock that Song Yadong had. So Petr Yan hit a Granby roll to get out of it, and Song Yadong still had it locked onto him, and that was like, well, I mean, shit, like if we're gonna get some of that, then, you know, this could be another just real tough, you know, unanimous decision loss for Petr Yan, unfortunately. But I think he really did a good job of turning the tide, like, real quick in those the next two rounds. And, you know, it was good to see the guy actually come out on top finally in these super close decision fights. So
he just seemed to get a good read on Song's timing and his combinations as the fight went on, really starting in the very beginning of round 2. He kind of started to slip out of the way of the jab a little more, and like I said, he was landing a lot of counters from those.
He definitely couldn't afford to get hit by that jab. So.
Yeah, and Song hits hard. People don't really remember, but this dude has knocked some people out badly, and he does hit like a train. So to see Yan, you know, endure that first round and then come back in the next two and win them, pretty impressive, honestly. And it's just good overall, really, to see a guy like who's that talented back in the win column.
Yeah.
And I was looking into the rankings again. He did call for Chito Vera, which I'm not sure if we see. I'm not saying that Chito wouldn't be game, but I just don't know how long Chito's going to be out after a fight like that. I mean, we saw how swollen his face looked. But I was thinking even maybe the winner of Figgy versus Garbrandt could be a fun one for Yan. And by the way, we should have this conversation, and this is the endless battle with Rob versus Russian names. How do you say his first name? It's because I know it's not Peter, but I know you're saying that because it's like a cop out. Is it Piotr? Some people say Pelter. Like that's how Bruce Buffer says it. But then like other people say Piotr. I've heard the most people say Piotr, which is why I usually go with that. But I don't know. If
Me too. I mean,
if there's any
uh,
Russian people watching this, please say in the comments how to say his name. I'm begging you.
yeah, dude. I don't know. Maybe if we like learn like accents and stuff, but it's not like there's any accents in his name. It's just the 4 letters. So obviously, when we see PETR as people from the USA, we just naturally think Peter. But
And I'm not arguing with that, but I don't think that's it.
no,
And that's because if it was, that's how they'd all say it.
yeah.
It's just very confusing. It's not often that we hear like the commentary and Bruce Buffer have 2 different pronunciations, but I just feel like I've never heard people say this guy's name the same way. So that's why I just don't know. And usually it's the Russian last names that get me, but Jan, that's pretty easy. So, like I said, if there's any Russians watching this, please comment how to say his first name, like with the pronunciation, because we are very eager to hear that. But something else I'm very eager to do is to dive into these prelims, because the prelims were really just as fun as the main card. And the first one we can get into is Curtis Blaydes versus Jailton Almeida, which was such a huge fight for the heavyweight division, which is kind of wild that it was on the prelims in the first place. But the story of this fight, really, round 1, Jailton Almeida was on Curtis Blaydes like a wet blanket, but wasn't really doing much with the position. We already knew that Almeida has really good grappling and really good top control, but he hasn't been able to prove that he could do much with it. And you can't just out-wrestle a top contender like Curtis Blaydes, because even if you're able to stay on top of him the way you are in round 1, round 2 comes out, and then Curtis Blaydes obviously does what he does. He hits him with that uppercut as he goes in for the sloppy single leg, and then hits him with the hammer fist. For some reason, Almeida wasn't letting go. Maybe it was because he was hurt. But either way, Curtis Blaydes ends a 15-fight win streak by Almeida and probably puts himself in contention to fight Tom Aspinall for the interim title, a fight that Aspinall seems actually very interested in getting, because it would be a shot to, I guess, get that loss back, because it was a loss, but it was a weird loss because it was when when Aspinall hurt his knee, and Blaydes got the win by TKO, but it wasn't a real win per se. So I think running that one back 5 rounds for the interim title while Jones is out, I would love to see that, because I do think Curtis Blaydes has deserved a title shot for the longest time at any UFC Gold. Interim, undisputed, doesn't matter. I just think he deserves a shot at UFC Gold, and I hope that this amazing win, gets him that against Tom Aspinall. But what did you think of this one, man?
So, for me, this begs the question, talking about Jailton Almeida first. For me, it's what's stopping him from, in this fight, pretty much what he's doing, taking Curtis Blaydes' back and just latching onto it and trying to outmuscle him that way. But then, obviously, this being a heavyweight fight, and it being a guy like Curtis Blaydes who you're trying to do this with, what's stopping Jailton Almeida from doing that? I would say at 205 as a light heavyweight. I feel like that would probably play more beneficial to him, where he's able to, he's able to just neutralize a guy like that and then just work any sort of short striking that he needs to in that way. Because obviously, if you're gonna make that cut, then you're already taking whatever natural heavyweight tools and just whatever sort of features that he has with you there. So that's kind of what I think, because I think it was pretty disappointing to see. This was obviously like a big spot for him, and it was unfortunate to see him gas out after that first round and then get finished like that. So it's kind of like, if we're going to keep fighting these top guys, then is heavyweight the best spot to do it?
So I can't find what his weigh-in weight for this card was, but I see November of 2023 for one of the UFC fight nights, he weighed in at 236, which is very low for heavyweight. So I definitely see your point. It is worth exploring for him maybe to go down to 205, because who knows, maybe that grappling and that strength will do more for him down there. Actually, I like that point. I've never really even thought of it, because he's such like a jacked guy.
Yeah.
I never really like thought of how big he was because he's 6'3" and he's shredded, but 236. I think you can get down to 205 if you really go for it and if you really commit to that change. But I don't know if he will, just because maybe not yet, at least because I think that Blaydes is obviously at the very top of the division, like he is. Maybe it'll take another loss like that to maybe make that consideration for him. But I definitely see your point. I kind of agree with it in a sense. I'd like to see him
because
at 205.
it's not like, you know, you only get so many Cyril Gans, like guys that look smaller for the division and are able to lock on a submission like Cyril Gane can, like a heel hook, for instance. So, you know, with a guy like this, it just feels like you know, if that's how he wants, like, this fight with Curtis Blaydes is how he wants to his approach with these top guys going forward, then, you know, I don't know, maybe at some point there might be a stop at light heavyweight. But
I'm intrigued because he almost fights like Ben Askren used to fight. We were talking about him before, and that's why it popped into my mind. But honestly, even Ben Askren, though, threw more ground and pound than Almeida really tries to throw sometimes. I just think that you need another tool. You can't just be on top of a guy and not strike or not really go for the submissions full clip because you're worried about your gas tank. And maybe that's why he doesn't go down to 205, because you'd have to imagine that gas tank would go even quicker if you're cutting more weight.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think he's in an interesting spot now, too, because, 15 straight wins and now a loss.
Yeah.
Very curious to see how he comes back from that.
And I'd say that is something that plays into his favor as a heavyweight. Like, okay, you're more just bound to finish a fight faster, but we just saw now with a veteran like Curtis Blaydes that, you can have your game plan coming into the fight can be one thing, and then once the fight actually starts, you have to adjust. And so you got to be able to do that, because then what happened to Almeida could happen. So
yeah, I mean, I'm very intrigued to see who his next fight is against and how he does in it, because it's always intriguing to see how someone rebounds off of a loss after like the first time losing in a while. So
yeah,
in a natural transition from heavyweight to women's flyweight, we got Macy Barber versus Caitlin Cerminara.
Hey, this right here though might have been the closest fight in the entire card.
It was interesting, and I don't know how two judges scored this fight 30-27.
Me neither.
And then one judge scored it 29-28. I do think Macy deserved the win, but I don't know how you give her all 3 rounds. I think that she has really good power. She's great at like pressuring her opponents, but she gets kind of sloppy sometimes, and I think Caitlin kind of exposed that at certain points with certain counters and even in the clinch at certain points. But Macy is the best way to describe her. Macy is like a bully at 125. She's very strong for the weight class. She has such crazy power in her hands, and like I said, she pressures her opponents really well. And I think that's probably what led her to a win in this fight. If you remember back when she first got into the UFC, it was really only her striking that people talked about. But I think ever since she made that move to Team Alpha Male, her wrestling has gotten a lot better. And I think in this fight in particular, that really helped her get the win. But you seem to think that this fight was really close. So what did you think of the performance?
I think in the sense that, obviously Macy Barber's striking, which is what propelled her to the win, was one thing, and then the improved wrestling of Cerminara was the other thing that I think Macy Barber maybe just wasn't as prepared for. But obviously once again did enough to win in the end. But I guess what the judges are looking for, obviously those significant strikes and that damage and all that, and so that's ultimately what gets you the win in the end. But
she has a lot of fights like this, like close decisions where she's able to get the win because it looks like she's damaging the other person more because of that pressure and power. I think
that's what I think pretty much. But I think there's definitely a credit either way to be given to her, because this is obviously I would say Caitlin. Well, it's funny. The irony I'm about to say, and Caitlin, I'll say now Chukagian being a household name, but now she's got a different last name. So, but still the same person, being one of the more experienced fighters in the division and just all of women's MMA. Like, I think this was a good test for sure. Even for Cerminara, obviously having to work on that wrestling and then bring it out in this fight. I think it was a close matchup coming in anyways. Interesting. There was plenty of ways that it could go, but I thought it played out pretty nicely. It was I think they definitely wanted to both bring it, and there were definitely plenty of instances where they were both just slugging it out and seeing who could get the finish that way. So
I don't know about you, but I don't really know how well Macy Barber will do against the people in the top 5 besides Cerminara, obviously, at flyweight, and honestly, when she'll even get a shot at someone in that range, because we look around the rankings, Grasso versus Shevchenko 3 is going to happen. They were both just announced as coaches for Tough 32, which is interesting, so we'll see what happens there and the timing of that title fight. But then Erin Blanchfield versus Manon Fiorot, March 30th, obviously later this month. So the top 5 is kind of booked right now. But even when I look at it stylistically, I don't really know how well she does, because Shevchenko and Grasso are both killers. Blanchfield's grappling is so good. I really just don't know who can stop her in that department right now. And Fiorot, her striking is so precise that I think Barber's sloppiness might come to haunt her in a fight versus Manon. But Macy has shown that she can get a lot better over time, and maybe, who knows, in that span where these fights are happening and she's waiting for the dust to settle, she can make those necessary improvements to fight those top flyweights. And she's put herself now in the top 5. I think Cerminara, excuse me. It's going to take me a second. I mean, like you said, Chukagian is a household name, and now it's technically not. But, yeah, so she was ranked number 4, and Macy was number 6. So the 3 people above her, 3-1, Fiorot, Blanchfield, Shevchenko, and then obviously Grasso is the champion. So it'll be interesting to see how the dust settles at women's 125 and who Barber's next opponent will be, because I think that she's going to have to make some improvements in order to really put her stamp on that division to get a title shot, which she's very close to at this point. But, there's so many fights we could talk about here, man. And let's just move on to the next one. Munhoz Gamrot versus RDA. Another fight with a guy who's up and coming versus a former champion, a legend in the UFC in RDA. And this fight was interesting. So 229-28, 130-27, all in favor of Gamrot. I think the 30-27 by Eric Colon is a bit much. Now, I know Gamrot...
Oh, yeah.
Well, do you agree with me on this? Let me just say this, and you can tell me what you think. Gamrot got dropped bad in the beginning of the first round, and I know that he ended the first round on top of RDA for the last, 2 minutes or so, but he didn't really do a whole lot with that position. And considering that RDA almost finished the fight, I just don't understand how you give the round to Gamrot in that situation, especially when the control time wasn't even half the round. And there's real clear damage that RDA did. But I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, I don't know.
For me, it's kind of remind, in a way, it's like the UFC Mexico main event between Moreno and Royval, where that had obviously the questionable in terms of Herb Dean, interjecting himself and taking Moreno off when he had the double underhooks. In this fight here, in the sense that I guess that fight was expected to be more exciting and more action packed than it actually was. And so when you come into this fight and you take obviously a guy like Gamrot, who's kind of been, I would say, has been around the lot now a little bit at lightweight and is still obviously working to get there to the very top. And then obviously a veteran like RDA, who has actually been around the lot and has fought just about everybody you can think of. I guess, coming in, people are a lot more tuned into this fight. And so, In the sense, I guess, in the sense that Gamrot, who ended up winning the fight, I guess I guess it was just a more like underwhelming performance from him, and then why I would mention Gamrot, who won the fight, instead of RDA, is because, well, RDA, like, what does RDA have really even left to prove at this point, I guess, where Gamrot's the one still coming in looking to add these established names to his resume. So that's kind of how I'm gonna choose to approach it, even though I totally agree in the sense that it wasn't like that, and it was closer of a fight than what was his name, Eric Cologne scored it for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even saying it was a super close fight. I just don't agree with that first round. I don't think you can give a round to a guy just for control time when that same guy got dropped, I think, twice in the first minute and almost finished. I just think that the damage should mean more than the control in that situation. And isn't it crazy, too, that in this fight, we're talking about Gamrot, who won fairly dominantly, and the biggest moment in the fight was RDA dropping him early, which is like, says a lot about how underwhelming the win was.
Definitely, for sure. So I guess in that, in that sense, I guess just really, I guess if we want to speak on like going forward for Munhoz Gamrot,
I mean, you know my thoughts. I think him versus Benoit Saint-Denis, 5 rounds would be such a fun matchup.
It really in that case, it just begs like the question, like, do you want to match up the guy coming off a loss, the guy coming off a win? So that's the interesting thing. But like, I think like in this case it makes the most sense because like because of how underwhelming of a win it was for Munhoz Gamrot, how much better like we know that he is of putting on a full bell-to-bell performance, and that nobody's questioning anything about, and that he's not even getting dropped in. So even just like in this, for a test like RDA that he had to pass, and he did either way, no matter how you look at it, like that's in the record books is a win for Munhoz Gamrot over another established name in the division. So in that case, it's just fair to just keep moving him up. And what better way than a guy who also fought on the card and also put on a nice showing for what it was worth.
The fact that Saint-Denis almost had the more impressive performance in a knockout loss is kind of crazy.
But crazy sport.
Yeah, I mean, hey man, that's why we love it. But let's move on to Kyler Phillips versus Pedro Munhoz. This was an interesting fight, and a fight that kind of, we talked about it in the lead up, but a bit unexpected in a way, because Pedro's fought a lot of killers at 135, and now Kyler Phillips gets his shot at Pedro, up and comer. And he trains in Arizona at the MMA lab, knows Sean O'Malley and all those guys, and he has a very similar style to Sean O'Malley. It's very like flowy on the feet, a lot of stance switches and creative striking, and that's really what won him the fight. Seemed like Pedro just didn't really know what was coming at any moment. It could be high kicks, spinning kicks, punches, just Kyler was able to keep it very unpredictable, and I do think that's why he won the fight as kind of dominantly as he did. He landed a lot of great combinations, and Pedro just didn't really seem to have an answer. But what did you think of it?
And that's what I wanted to highlight when we were previewing this card and then talking about certain prelim fights, was because I think Kyler Phillips is just absolutely electric, and a guy like Pedro Munhoz across from him, who's gonna come forward and who's gonna try to apply the pressure in a more slow-paced, methodical kind of way, like old school kind of way, like you would think so with a guy like Pedro Munhoz, who's been around for as long as he has and has fought the guys that he has. And so I thought that dynamic was going to create something really all fans, no matter if you're a new fan or you're a OG fan, like could really gravitate towards and appreciate. And in this case, it really just was a more one-sided affair in favor of the younger Kyler Phillips, who I feel like just has been putting on like these sort of highlight reel kind of performances for a while now, and it's just a guy who can really only hope just continues to ascend up the division and gets like his shot at that championship one day. So
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a sleeper pick at 135 because he's a lot better than I think people give him credit for. He's not the most like loud guy there.
Yeah, I think that's what it is because of how like like you were saying how flowy his style is. Like there really, perhaps like there just isn't a lot of care for like the defense and all that, and so he could get caught with something and drop that way. But
he's exciting though. His striking, like like you're saying, is flowy. There is that risk. He's a good grappler too. We didn't really have to see it as much in this fight, but he does have that skill set. I was thinking, and I don't know if this would happen, but Dominic Cruz and him would be an interesting fight, just stylistically. And I don't think Dominic is really like above taking a fight like that either. I mean, I remember when he fought Casey Kenny after the Henry Cejudo fight. So like we know he's not against a fight like this. So maybe we'll get to see that at some point. But this card, man. Even the early prelims were crazy. Like, we could we can go on and on. But Michel Pereira, crazy, rear naked choke. 1 minute into his fight. Then, if that's not quick enough for you, Robelis de Spain, well known in the Taekwondo world, an elite striker. And I think he's only 4-0 or 5-0 now in MMA. He just made it abundantly clear that he should be fighting some upper level opponents at heavyweight with that win over Josh Parisian. I mean, Parisian rushing forward the way he did into that shot was probably the worst possible thing he could have done. Yeah. But Despain, man, this dude is a legit elite striker, even now. So I would definitely like to see him get a big bump in competition. I mean, the power that guy has off the back foot is just insane. But then besides that, the only other thing I really wanted to mention before we kind of get to some of the news stories related to the card and then on to Joshua versus Ngannou and the rest of the stuff we still have to talk about. But Joanna Wood retires after a good win over, I think it's Mariana Moroz. I always struggle to say her name, but she's been around for a while too. It was a good win. Great ending to her career, the fact that she landed that crazy spinning back fist near the end of that fight. Mm-hmm. It's hard to go out cooler than that. And Joanna Wood, she's been around women's 125 for a very long time, and she's been a mainstay, really, for women's MMA. And in the UFC, she's always fought the highest level of competition. I always thought this was funny, how she has, like, the most delicate Scottish voice, and she's a legit killer in the cage. So I'll miss her. She was fun to watch, and I know like some people, crap on women's MMA sometimes, but she was always somebody who would put on a show when she was in the cage. So it's gonna be rough to see her go, but respect to her because she had a really good career. But
yeah, whole card is just striker's paradise.
Honestly, man. And speaking of strikers, there was one more story that we should talk about on this card, and that was Joanna Jędrzejczyk getting inducted to the UFC Hall of Fame, and it is so much deserved. I mean, let's just talk about all the things that Joanna has done in the sport. She started off her career 13-0, winning the UFC strawweight title against Carla Esparza in one of the most ferocious title fight winning performances I think that I've ever seen. And she defended the title 5 times, had a great rivalry with Claudia Gadelha. And this is really when women's MMA was just starting to take off with the rise of Ronda Rousey. But then even after losing the title in the upset fashion that she did to Rose Namajunas, she still had some great moments after that. I mean, who could forget that war that she had at UFC 248 with Zhang Weili? That's not only the best female fight of all time, that's one of the best fights, male or female, that we've ever seen in this sport. And I just think Joanna is so important to women's MMA. She helped build it and build its credibility with how dominant she was at 115. And people, it's been such a long time, but people really forget sometimes just how great she was in the midst of her prime. And even after her prime, she was still beating top contenders at that weight class. So shout out to Joanna. She's phenomenal. Just, I don't know really how to even go forward from this, but just what do you think of just her exceptional career in the UFC and this announcement?
Yeah, hats off for sure. like seriously, that Zhang Weili fight where I think everyone was watching anyways, and then for them to put on the performance that they did was like really something that people like just anyways just really like appreciated and gravitate towards. So like literally, if like for nothing else, like she was a part of one of the greatest fights to ever happen in the octagon. So like, and then even like now, like Zhang Weili got the title back, and so like there's obviously no shame in losing a fight like that whatsoever. So I mean, yeah, that's unfortunate. It's like it's crazy how fast like it all comes and goes once again. Like 'cause you could have someone who's was so dominant for a long time, and then once that first loss comes in, I think things start to kind of like pile up and then start to go downhill. It's like people tend to like kind of just forget and just leave it in the past. But I think like obviously for sure now, I think the UFC Hall of Fame like is really starting to build its legitimacy and credibility back up. And then obviously with inductions like these and giving people like these their moments on big cards like this, like it's the right way to do it. So
Yeah, it's great to see. And like you're saying, the UFC Hall of Fame has definitely built itself up. I mean, Vanderlei Silva wasn't exactly on great terms with the UFC, and they just put him in. So he deserves it because he's a pioneer in the sport, just like Joanna was a pioneer in women's MMA. And it's just cool to see legends get their moment. But it won't be complete until they get Randy Couture in.
yeah.
I know that's easier said than done, but like Randy Couture needs to be in the UFC Hall of Fame. I know that there's the rift between him and the company, but he deserves it. So at least we're seeing some steps forward. But what an unreal show that the UFC put on in Miami for us. I mean, we literally just talked about it for an hour and 11 minutes, which is crazy. That's like literally longer than a majority of our podcasts. And
Yep.
stay strapped in, guys, because we still have some more stuff to talk about because this was one of the craziest weekends in combat sports that we've seen in a while. I mean, it's just crazy to think that this card just happened. UFC 300 is basically a month away at this point. But until then, let's talk about some of the other stuff that happened over the weekend. Big fight in boxing. Anthony Joshua fights Francis Ngannou in Saudi Arabia. And for those who don't know what happened, Anthony Joshua put Francis Ngannou's lights out with one of the most brutal right hands I think that we've ever seen in boxing history. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. He dropped Francis 3 times during the fight. He just looked faster than him. The feints had Ngannou biting basically every single time. Joshua's timing is outstanding, and it seems like all of those factors led him to an easy win against Francis Ngannou, who is 0-2 in boxing, but 0-2 against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, 2 respected champions. So crazy to think about. What did you think of this fight as a whole?
Yeah, so just to like talk about, us being MMA fans and then getting to cover a guy like Francis Ngannou, it's like when you see someone like that on the receiving end of with his back against the wall, when we're so used to him putting other people up against the wall and him being the one to put people down, it really does like, open up your eyes and like make you realize how like real just the combat sports world like actually is. And so when he's standing across from a guy like Anthony Joshua right after fighting Tyson Fury and then knocking him down, you kind of, I guess coming in, you kind of just think like, well, all right, like, okay, he's got some sort of heavyweight boxing experience under his belt now, like, so perhaps now like he's gonna maybe this fight is gonna be even closer than that Tyson Fury fight, and maybe this time he gets his hand raised. But what we don't necessarily put that much stock into is not even necessarily because he should be putting stock into it, obviously, is Anthony Joshua's side of the fight and how he now sees that Francis Ngannou has a fight under his belt against the guy that Anthony Joshua is trying to get to and fight, and so he sees that, and then he obviously is the one picking up on things and noting them, and has his game plan just set in stone for how he's gonna come into this fight, in the sense that Francis doesn't move his head a whole lot, and that Francis obviously he's the one gonna be wadding in more with the shots and try to put the power punches on, whereas Anthony Joshua just has to hit him with the feints, keep the jab out, and then just stay in the pocket, and then just fire an absolute dominant, just crazy overhand like he did to knock Francis Ngannou out. And that's just how that went. What I was saying is, like, after that first knockdown from Anthony Joshua to Francis, like, I thought from there was, okay, well, now Francis really has to, like, adjust, and his corner's got to be telling him something now that they've got to adjust to. But once he got back up, it was like, man, I didn't want to believe that it was all set in stone that he was gonna lose and get knocked out like that. But I mean, there wasn't really anything anyone was gonna do about it, because Anthony Joshua was the one that just seemed like he had like everything to lose, and he fought like it. And so
yeah, I mean, Joshua basically, he dominated this fight. He made it look easy, and I think in a way he does have Tyson Fury to thank for that, because like you said, he kind of gathered the intel. And I also think Tyson Fury didn't take Ngannou very seriously, and now Joshua, seeing that fight, knew to give him some of that respect, and I think him giving him that extra respect kind of led to what we saw, because he actually prepared a perfect game plan and executed it as well as really you could have executed a plan like that. So I was super impressed by Anthony Joshua. I would love to see him fight maybe the winner of Fury versus Usyk whenever that whole saga is over. I mean, we were talking about this before the show. Me and you aren't as big of like boxing fans as we are MMA fans, so we don't really know exactly what the rankings and how that's all going to be situated. I want to say that Fury and Usyk have like an automatic rematch clause, so it may be a little bit before he fights either of those guys, but this is more of an MMA show, so let's talk about Francis Ngannou a little bit. I do think it's worth noting that this man, while being 0-2 in boxing, has only lost to legit champions, and respect to him, really, for making life-changing money. He bet on himself. A lot of people, including us, weren't really sure of how well that was going to work out for him, but now, I mean, he's in the PFL, he's boxed Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, but I would like to see him make his debut in the PFL Smart Cage next in MMA against Renan Ferreira. It's a big fight against another guy who's got crazy punching power like him. I think that's the fight to make. Maybe take a tiny bit of a break from boxing after that, get in the PFL, go back to your roots, and I think a lot of people will enjoy seeing a star like Ngannou be in that PFL Smart Cage. So
yeah, dude, still to see Francis Ngannou in the main events like this and stuff is it is good, because I think people kind of get tied up in the sense that, oh my god, like, he got folded the way he did, like, here's a reminder or a note to all future MMA fighters trying to cross over to boxing, like, just don't do it. And it's like, well, once again, he's fighting legit champions, the best in the world, and like, everyone's at least got a puncher's chance, so
especially Ngannou.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Who obviously knocked it down Tyson Fury, like, so that's just what I think. I think it's still good for all combat sports, and creates opportunities and stuff. And like, even after the fight, Anthony Joshua was like, like, don't leave boxing, like, we'll speak out another time or something like that. So, like, once again, like, you take, like, even just, like, the minds of those two guys, and, like, just the gravity that they hold just in the combat sports world, like, it could create, like, good going forward. So
yeah, man. And made $20 million reportedly, so that's life-changing money. I definitely think that that's good for him. I was thinking this, by the way, and this isn't an insult. I don't want it to come across as disrespectful, but he was talking about he got paid $600,000 in his last title fight, and Kamaru Usman had to lend him money because he was going broke. Is it just me, or is that crazy? How are you getting, like, how do you get $600,000? And I know that's before taxes and paying your gym and your coaches, but, like, how do you squander $600K? Like, I just want to say that, but I mean, $20 million, that's a lot different, and I don't think he's going to be squandering that anytime soon. That's legit life-changing money. But I don't know. When I heard that, I was just curious. I was like, if you're getting paid that much, what are you spending your money on that you didn't have any money? But anyway, at least he's in the PFL now. He's probably going to be making life-changing money every time he gets in the cage or the ring in the future. But to stay in the ring, let's talk about some of the crazy news that just got released last week. I think it was on Friday. So for those who don't know, Jake Paul will box Mike Tyson. That's right, Mike Tyson on July 20th in Arlington, Texas. The fight will stream on Netflix, free for all subscribers, which I think is a cool thing.
I think so too. I've honestly been like waiting for something like Netflix to pick up live sports and stuff.
Well, they're starting to. This is the first time they're diving into the live combat sports world. I mean, they did the F1 PGA type of thing, and they also acquired Monday Night Raw, which is going to be big for them next year. But they're really diving in with this one, and it's a bit controversial. You know, it's unclear right now whether the bout will be pro or exhibition. I guess it depends on what the Texas Commission decides, if Mike Tyson being 58 is a danger or not. But when I look at this fight objectively, Mike Tyson did kind of gas out a little bit against Roy Jones Jr., but I still think in round one of this fight, Jake Paul has Mike Tyson on his hands. And Mike Tyson has a mentality that there's not many fighters who share it. He's coming to kill in the ring. And we've heard him talk about it on Joe Rogan. I mean, everybody made fun of when he said that fighting makes him erect, I think is the word that he used. And I don't know about you, but that's not someone I'd be trying to get in the ring with. But Mike Tyson, I mean, is one of the greatest boxers of all time. I mean, when you look at him in the late 80s and early 90s, you were buying a pay-per-view to watch him finish a guy within 3 rounds. And that's unheard of, really, with boxing. So Mike Tyson still has that knockout power. He has that scary mentality. And I think Jake Paul is really going to have to be at his best in the first 2 rounds of that fight. But I think if he can drag Mike Tyson into deeper waters, that's when I think it gets a little more even. But, like, people are mad that Mike's taken this fight at such an old age, but people are kind of disrespecting what Mike Tyson has done in his career. And I think that when you're that high of a level of a boxer, that doesn't just go away. Yeah, his cardio might be way worse, but that skill in the first minute of that fight, I don't know, man. I think he could put Jake's lights out, and I think that this is a very dangerous fight for him early in the fight. But later in the fight, not so much, and that's kind of when I tend to agree with some of the critics. But I don't know. Do you think that this is messed up by Jake Paul, or do you think that this is a fun one?
No, I mean, see, I don't think what I think is that, you know, Mike Tyson, like, understands he's gonna get paid a lot of money for this, for one, and then it's like, well, everyone thinks, okay, if it's just the old age that everyone thinks that, you know, I'm gonna lose, then it's like, I think there's a difference between, you know, whether he just loses or he actually, like, gets beat up. And so I'm not entirely sure if people think he's actually gonna get, like, beat up, or he's just gonna lose and not look as dominant as everyone is accustomed to seeing Mike Tyson at. But to be honest, like, it really just, I think it's just for him and Mike. If I put myself in Mike Tyson's shoes, it's a thing where, like, or you were just saying, like, he's still one of the most ferocious, like, boxers the world has ever seen, one of the greatest of all time, and it's, you know, a transcendent kind of fighter that, you know, at this point in time, if he still has that drive in him and he wants to take a fight, if he sees a guy like Jake Paul, who's obviously making his rounds in the boxing world, and he wants to do what he can to stifle it while getting a huge payday, then, like, what can you really do or say to stop the guy, you know?
Exactly.
It's just like,
that's kind of how I feel too, like, because everybody's criticizing, some people are criticizing Mike Tyson for taking this fight, and they're saying he's going to ruin his legacy, but, like, who are you to tell Mike Tyson what he should or shouldn't do? when you haven't done what he's done. He can do whatever he wants. He's Mike Tyson. Like, you know what I'm saying? He built that legacy. It's up to him if he wants to fight again. It's not up to all these pundits. And even it's not up to former fighters either. Yeah, he's 58 years old. Yeah, that's a disadvantage. But if he thinks he can go in there and win, like you're saying, who are two schmoes like us to tell him that he shouldn't? You know what I mean?
I think, yeah, man. It's really just like a thing of just like kind of just take it in and like let it wash over you that Mike Tyson's gonna make the walk to the boxing ring, and then it's like, so then what I'm questioning, and then obviously like the both of us are questioning, and now all of us I guess are waiting to see is whether or not it's gonna be an exhibition or not. Because like for me, it's like, well, holy fuck, like, you know, I believe, what was it, 2005, Mike Tyson's last professional boxing match?
Something like, I can figure that out if while you make your point.
Yeah, dude. For me, that's like, bro, like, I was 4 or 5 years old when this guy last fought professionally. Like, if I can see a professional Mike Tyson boxing match in my lifetime, like, I am not having any qualms about it whatsoever. I don't care what happens. Like, I think that is something that, you know, I want to be able to watch and like experience in some way, like at least once. Like I'll be able to do with this fight. So
yeah, I mean, his last pro fight, to answer your question, June 11th, 2005. So you were right about that. His last title fight was 2002 against Lennox Lewis, which he lost, but that was Lennox Lewis is, in my opinion, arguably one of the top 3 heavyweight boxers of all time. Doesn't get the credit he deserves because he's not as flamboyant as an Ali or a Tyson, but Lennox Lewis, respect to him. I don't think I've ever said that on the Hurt Hand. Maybe I have, but if I haven't, just so people know, I think that Lennox Lewis is a top 3 heavyweight of all time. So Mike Tyson, it's crazy that it'll almost be 20 years since his last pro fight, if this one is made professional. Not sure if it's gonna be though. I don't know. I just can't see a commission wanting that on their hands if something, God forbid, were to go wrong. I think he's 58. I feel like it's probably going to be an exhibition and probably going to be similar to what Tyson versus Roy Jones was, but you never really know. So I think that's the question that everybody's waiting to see get answered, like you said. But last thing to talk about in this wild, wild week of combat sports is the PFL. We got Cedric Doumbe taking his first professional loss in the cage in France, and it was very odd circumstances because there was a shard of glass that kind of gave him a splinter on his toe. It was bothering him clearly, as it would bother, I think, anybody, and Mark Goddard, instead of maybe taking a second to take the splinter out, stopped the fight. And I get why he did do that, because there's no timeouts in MMA unless the ref grants it. And it seems like an odd rule, but it makes sense because, one, this is so fluky. I can't think of a time that anything like this has ever happened. But the rules technically say if the fighter doesn't want to fight, the ref needs to save him and stop it. And if technically in that moment Cedric Doumbe felt that he couldn't fight with that piece of glass in his toe, and you know, for that reason, I understand why Mark had to stop it. I think this is more of a rules problem than it really is Mark Goddard's fault. And I know Doumbe is pretty mad at Mark Goddard right now, understandably so, but I do get it. I just think that there should be some sort of contingency plan for this because, one, why was there glass in the cage? That should never happen. But two, why is there no rule in any athletic commission really to prevent something like this from happening? And I don't know, maybe if it's just because it was in France, because MMA wasn't even really legal in France until a few years ago, so maybe that just wasn't something that they've ever thought of. But I do think that this is just unfortunate to see a guy who's a former Glory kickboxing champion, one of the better strikers in MMA as a sport, even though he's relatively inexperienced. It's just tough to see him lose for the first time in such a fluky type of way. But I don't know. Is it just me, or it seems like the PFL always kind of runs into this type of luck?
Yeah, dude. Like, what the actual fuck was that? You know, like, okay, so the broadcast they cut to Big John so that he could give an explanation, and that's great and all, but like, even, if even you're just listening to the explanation and then like you're like, okay, but like you're still gonna have questions afterwards, because I think Big John like did all he could, but even he was like, okay, well, how the hell am I gonna explain this to like the casual viewer in a way? So when he was like, he said like, okay, so what happens here is that this is a self-inflicted kind of thing that happened to Cedric Doumbe, and so when he looks over to Mark Goddard to let him know, and then Baki does the same thing, that at that point it's like, okay, like the fight's off, he can't continue, and there's no disputing it whatsoever. And so that's where everyone kind of like has the confusion. It's like, okay, well, why doesn't he have like any sort of like case where like this is something like, because and then so I think back, it's because it's self-inflicted. And so it's like, well, man, it's just like then it goes in as a TKO loss, and then it's like, what's there? All there's there to say is like, okay, like I think for when the fight was actually going on, like Baki seemed to have things in control and whatnot, and then that's just kind of how things are going. But like now it's like, okay, well, could that be because Doumbe had this freaking piece of glass in his foot and wasn't able to operate the way he wanted to, and so like once it gets to a point where they're across from each other and there's not as much action going on, and he looks over to Mark Goddard to let him know like, hey, like this is interrupted, like this is stifling me from being able to fight at 100%. Like at that point it's like, oh, okay, well, you can't continue, so that's it. There's no disputing it or anything, and that's what leaves everybody confused.
Yeah. I think we both agree on the fact that Mark Goddard kind of did what he had to do, as unfortunate as that is. And it just seems like it's more of an odd rule that might need maybe a little more clarification, which I don't even think would come unless something crazy like this would happen, because it's so out of the ordinary. Like, how could you even think of something like that before we see a situation like Cedric Doumbe's? So it's just bad luck.
Yeah, they agreed to run it back at some point.
They should. I think that's fair. You don't want a fight to end like that, and I know Baki doesn't want the fight to end like that either.
Yeah,
he wants to really win.
I was just like standing there like trying to like process like what the hell was even happening.
Yeah.
And then they brought Big John on the screen, and it's like, okay, like it's self-inflicted. I get that's what you have to officially rule it as a commission, but like, how are I guess like I don't even know, like
there needs to be like a human error type of rule
how in the
there.
future,
or no contest maybe, like
how in the future are they going to be able to make things like clearer, I guess. But,
yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's not going to be any clarification, sadly, but it is what it is. But either way, man, this whole past week in combat sports was as exciting as it's been, I think, in a very, very long time. This was a fun one for the true fans out there. And honestly, we're about an hour and a half into this podcast right now and about to be at the end. If you've lasted this long into the episode, you're a real one. So congrats to that. That's what we think. And next week, it definitely won't be as crazy unless something wild happens before the UFC fight night. That is Tai Tuivasa versus Marcin Tybura at the Apex. But either way, we'll be back next week to cover that and whatever else happens. So if you guys stuck around, thank you. This was a fun episode, I think, for us to do. THH 63 in the books. We'll see you all next time.